Let's play a game of 2nd edition 40k. Let's play with Ed from Minisodes. Let's use old models and beautiful terrain. Let's use templates, psychic power cards and strategy cards. Let's pitch some Ultramarines led by Marneus Calgar against a Hive Tyrant and his chittering hordes. I'm Matthew, this is Miniscape, welcome. If you like older Warhammer content, you're in the right place. If you like the ravings of a madman, refer to my last comment. Hit all the relevant engagement buttons, and do check out my Instagram. You can support me with Ko-fi, links in description. Allow me to give you some context for this video. Context 1. Sometimes a game is so epic, a sequel is inevitable. 2 years ago, my Ultramarines survived a terrifying Tyranid onslaught. Off the back of that, we had the idea that Marneus Calgar might lead a small Ultramarine strike force to eliminate a key Hive Tyrant, who continues to be a thorn in his realm. Or maybe that's just an excuse to have another game with Ed. Context 2. In White Dwarf issue 206, hobby legend Adrian Wood wrote an article on the merits of small games of 40k, games in the region of 500 points, or 1,000 points or less. He makes the argument that a game of Warhammer 40 grand doesn't in fact need to be grand in order for fun to be had. 2,000 points or 1,500 points was the accepted norm, but he advocates for 500 point games, which could fit into a lunchtime. He describes how he had strung these games together into a mini campaign, adding some new units to his collection, and he learnt some new rules nuances that had escaped him in larger games. He writes, "We played some very exciting deadly missions, the slightest turn of the dice having the most disastrous results for either side. And later, I was struck by how the small size of the games made the battles so much more nail-biting than the usual large games I'd played." With that in mind, Ed and I designed a game to explore this idea for ourselves, a small narrative game of 40k, using models from our collections. We settled on Ultramarines and Tyranids, being keen to follow up our last game with a view to getting Marneus Calgar toe-to-toe with a Hive Tyrant. Since a Hive Tyrant is a chunk of points with a little left for anything else, we extended our points allocation to 750. Accompanying Marneus Calgar on his fool's errand was a Lexicanum Librarian, a level 1 Psyker which I have represented with the Tigurius model. Let's just assume this lowly peddler of cheap tricks is cosplaying his favourite Chief Librarian. Along with them are 3 combat squads, a tactical combat squad led by a sergeant, sporting a power fist, a devastator combat squad with 2 heavy bolters loaded with hellfire shells, and an assault combat squad, all armed with bolt pistols and chain swords, save the sergeant who has a power fist, and 1 marine who has a flamer. Now here's Ed to talk about his list.
As Matthew was theming this game around hunting a Hive Tyrant, it made sense to have this beastie at the heart of the list. So here he is, complete with a bone sword, lash whip, and barbed strangler. Hive Fleet Behemoth has also bestowed this creature with a hardened carapace, optic membranes, and psychic scream. Guarding their leader are 2 broods of Tyranid warriors, all armed with a pair of bone swords. These synapse creatures are fast, tough, and more than capable of scything their way through the Emperor's finest. Scuttling along beside the warriors are 14 termagants armed with flesh borers. The final entry in my list is a Lictor, a nightmarish and single-minded hunter with the optic membranes biomorph. There it is, 747 points of chitinous fury.
Look at the way Ed's organised his cards in his box. It's just a vomit of cardboard. And 2 dreadnoughts. Nice. And it looks like these cards were held together by Nurgle's Bogey. Considering the context of our game, we decided to choose the most appropriate missions. I chose Assassins to fit Calgar's thirst to spill Hive Tyrant Ichor, and Ed chose the Tyranid-specific mission Terrorize, which awards him victory points for slaying characters.
Terrorize!
And additional points every time my units fail break checks, including those caused by fear and terror. Since Tyranids have the lowest strategy rating, Ed deployed first, his Tyrant in the centre, flanked by 2 warrior squads, with skittering termagants on his left flank. I deployed Calgar with the Librarian and Tactical Squad to meet the Tyrant in the middle, while the Devastator Squad held back to provide covering fire from their elevated position, and the Assault Squad set up in some ruins opposite the Termagants. But wait, a rustling was heard in the bushes, a shuffling behind a nearby bunker. Could this be a sneaky lictor? I mean, yes it is, but the Ultramarines probably didn't know this at the time. What a fearsome beast he is with those wriggly tendrils and razor-sharp claws. The Ultramarines won the roll for the first turn, making the first move towards bloody combat, and either glory or defeat, or perhaps both. Ranks of chittering critters and lumbering unspeakable horrors were salivating across the battlefield, while the Ultramarines whispered a silent prayer and remembered their courage and honour.
"For McCrag!"
cried the Assault Squad as they fired up their jump packs, and landed just shy of a horde of Termagants, clutching their flesh-borer bioweapons. Unbeknownst to the Sons of Gunnerman, they had just boosted away from a hidden lictor. Centuries-old jump packs and the ignorance of their inner workings means they are not always as reliable as one would hope. In 2nd edition 40k, the Wargear entry for jump packs states that they must scatter d3 inches when they land. Some people ignore this altogether, or merely roll to scatter the whole squad together. But we enjoy randomness, so we scattered each one. Unfortunately, this meant a few of the brothers did not make up as much ground as they wanted. Most notably the one armed with the Flamer, who could now not bless the Xenos with the gift of burning promethium. In addition, the Sergeant ended up out of coherency, but the rules say this is fine as long as he attempts to get back into coherency next turn. Spurred on by their lord to engage the Tyrant and his bodyguard, the Tactical Marines advanced in order to bring their bolt guns to bear on the enemy. Of course, Calgar would not dream of letting a lesser brother steal his thunder, so he was hot on their heels, along with the recently qualified Lexicanum Theophanus, whose mental fortitude had already been tested by the Tyranid's shadow in the warp. The Devastator Squad did not move, however, holding position in some ruins to provide covering fire. In the shooting phase, the opening salvo came from the Assault Squad's bolt pistols. 3 of the 5 shots struck the Termagant, and 2 of them wounded, bolt rounds tearing through their alien flesh with ease, since they had no armor to protect them. Having loaded Hellfire shells into their heavy bolters, the Devastators opened up on the closest warrior squad. A lack of cover and a targeter meant only 2s were needed to hit, but alas, a roll of snake eyes meant both shots were wide. The splashing of mutagenic acid on Xenos hide would have to wait. Even though the Hellfire shell entry mentions a 2-inch blast marker, the rules seem to indicate that this is only used if a model is hit, is wounded, and makes a saving throw. In this case, the template is used to represent the splatter of acid off the original target and onto his nearby comrades. That's how we interpreted it anyway. Do let me know if we got this wrong. The Tactical Squad opened up with their bolt guns on the same squad of warriors that escaped the wrath of Hellfire. 2 shots found their mark, but neither of them could wound versus the toughness 5 of the Tyranid warriors. With carefree abandon, Calgar turned the gauntlets of Ultramar at the other warriors' squad. The built-in bolters count as a storm bolter, which indeed hit their target, but sadly caused no wounds since a jam was rolled on the sustained fire dice. It would be another 2 turns before these relics would fire again. Serves you right, Calgar, for bringing an antique to war. There was no hand-to-hand combat, so we swiftly move on to the psychic phase. A warp flux of 8 was rolled, giving us 4 cards each. Librarian Theophanus attempted to cast Prescience, which gives him a bunch of rerolls until the next psychic phase trundles around. Ed attempted to nullify, needing a 3+ since his Psycho was a higher level than mine, and of course, he succeeded, so there would be no prescienting this time. With that done, it was Ed's turn to respond, at which point he whipped out a Psychic Scream. This is a power that can stun or incapacitate a Psyker, depending on the roll of 2d6. 3 outcomes are possible. Rolling equal to or under his toughness means no effect. Rolling above his toughness means he was at least stunned, and can do nothing until the next psychic phase, fighting with a weapon skill of 1 if applicable. Rolling above his leadership means he has gone insane and is removed as a casualty. Thankfully, I was able to nullify the power this time, so I would have to wait until next turn to see if my Psyker would succumb to this terrible power. It was Tyranid turn 1. As a result of one of my scatter rolls, which sounds like something you could buy in a bakery. Anyway, one of my Assault Marines had scattered such that his lictor could charge it, and charge it he did, the monster snarling and his tendrils writhing with glee. The squad has to take a fear test, but it passed, which meant no extra victory points for Ed from this. Ed skittered his termagants to meet my assault squad head-on, and indeed, there was much weeping and gnashing of teeth. With their victims just over the grassy knoll, the warriors ran to meet them, swinging their bone swords to and fro, and the Hive Tyrant not far behind. The other squad strode wide, aiming between the tactical and the Devastator squads, keeping their evening meal options open, depending on what morsel might titillate their fancy. Foul Xenos had closed upon them. All the Ultramarines could do was stand their ground and channel their grit. In the termagants' hands, the flesh borers did quiver, and a rain of borer beetles erupted from their fleshy nest towards the assault combat squad. Of the beetles that found their target, only 3 of them wounded, but 2 armor saves were failed, leading to the demise of 2 battle brothers. Next to fire was the Hive Tyrant, levelling its barbed strangler at the tactical squad. A hit meant the 3-inch blast marker was placed on the closest Marine, but that wouldn't come into play yet. We had to roll a few dice first. The barbed strangler fires a seed pod, which can then enter a victim and explode into a mass of writhing tentacles which tear the victim apart. In game terms, this means a wounded model is killed regardless of remaining wounds if they fail their armor save, and if they are killed, a 3-inch blast marker is placed over the victim. This is exactly what happened to the first chap. Calgar and the other Marine had to make a test to see if they were caught. A d6 roll of 1 to 3 means they are fine, but 4 to 6 means they are trapped. The tactical fella was fine, but Calgar was trapped. Ed then had to roll over my model's strength on 2d6 to rip him apart, and with no save of any kind allowed, he would be killed outright, putting Daddy McCragg's crusade to an end before it could really begin. We tested versus Calgar's strength of 8 from his gauntlets, which seemed reasonable since the flavor text says he was trying to rip and tear his way out. Whew, only a 6, so Calgar was fine. At least only his weapon was jammed, and he had not become jam. What a scary weapon. It was time for some hand-to-hand combat. The lictor got his hands, well, not hands, talons, I guess, onto this unsuspecting Space Marine. With his relatively measly 2 attacks, he rolled a 4 and a fumble, versus the 6 and a critical hit by the lictor. His chainsword at least managed to parry a 6 from the lictor to a 1, giving it a fumble. Suffice it to say, there were many wounds, and his armour could not withstand them all, and 6s being needed to save. The lictor claimed its first victim. Anyway, and the lictor made a follow-up move closer to the other 2 assault marines. In the psychic phase, 9 cards were split between us, and Ed had another crack at unleashing a psychic scream. My nullify failed this time, and a 7 was rolled, which was less than the leadership of the librarian, but not his toughness, so he was stunned for a turn. Ed joked that, in world, the Hive Tyrant was showing the librarian unspeakable eldritch horrors. Perhaps the egestion orifices of hive ships or their sexual organs. Regardless, it was enough to stun Librarian Theophanous while he meditated on those images, which you would now need a VPN to access if you lived in the UK. We felt out of control was the closest appropriate marker here. It was Ultramarines' turn 2. The first thing to do was get the assault squad out of the lictor's charge range. They fired up their jump packs and bounded over the termagants. The other squads held their ground, keen to get in some rapid fire before the Nids could charge them. The flamer-wielding Marine from the assault squad began the shooting phase by blessing the termagants with a jet of combusting promethium. 9 critters were touched by the flames, and mercifully, all 5 of the partials were rendered unpartial, and all but 1 wounded. Ah, the smile of the Emperor, which you can clearly trace out from the pattern of these dice if you ignore 1 or 2. 8 termagants dead, boiling in their own juices, aided by some cleansing flame. But the assault marines weren't done yet. Ed gave me some invaluable advice. If you're not sure what to do next, roleplay what your faction would do. Faced with the choice of firing a bolt pistol or tossing a frag, I went for frag. Bugger the Codex Astartes, I wanted an explosion, despite the close range. The frag hit, so no scatter was needed. The blast caught 2 termagants, as well as the brother who cast it toward them. Yet it was only a partial hit, which was not promoted into a full one. 1 termagant escaped unharmed, but 1 was wounded and killed. I was pretty happy with that. A leadership test was taken, and passed. Brave critters, or hive mind or something. It was the tactical squad's turn to do some damage. They opened up on the nearest warrior squad. Bolt guns are bolting full rapid fire, and although some hits were scored, none of them wounded, which serves me right for forgetting to remove this dead marine before. Calgar readied his gauntlets of Ultramar, but then remembered they were jammed, so he spent the rest of the phase fiddling with the mechanism. The Devastators had another punt with their Hellfire shells at the warriors closest to them. Both shells hit this time, needing only a 2+ to wound due to their mutagenic acid. One of the shells wounded the closest warrior and caused a single wound. Acid splash only occurs onto the others, first if the original target rolls a successful armor save, and second if a 6 is rolled. Neither applied here. I'm wondering if regular heavy bolter rounds would have been better in this scenario. So after much deliberation and dice rolling, 1 wound was inflicted due to Hellfire. The other Marines rapid-fired with their bolt guns. 2 wounds went through, one of which could not be saved by the warrior's chitinous armor. 1 warrior, at least, had fallen. At the beginning of the psychic phase, the librarian recovered from his horrendous visual ordeal and attempted to play prescience once more, which Ed did not have the means to prevent this time. Yet, once more his tyrant displayed images most foul, and the librarian was stunned for a second time. The roll, though, was not high enough for madness to fully set in. Unfortunately, Psychic Scream had rendered him useless for another turn. Ed's second turn opened up with the warriors charging the tactical squad. They tested for fear, but again passed. It has been said, after all, that they do not even know what fear is, or words to that effect. The second warrior squad, now but 2 strong, continued to sprint towards the Ultramarines' back line, doubtless with the Devastators in their sight. The Lictor, of course, joined them, outraged, or at the very least indignant at the Space Marines' use of Hellfire shells. Unlike his kindred spirits, the Hive Tyrant did not run, but leisurely strode on, no doubt willing to have another punt with a barbed strangler seed pod, and the few remaining termagants came about to face the Assault Marines. Of the 5 flesh-borer shots from the termagants, 2 of them hit and wounded the Marines. Could their power armor save them? The answer was no, and the final members of the assault squad were annihilated. The Hive Tyrant now levered his barbed strangler at the Devastators and launched another seed pod. It hit, but didn't wound. As I edit this, I fear we may have played a couple of things wrong here. 1, that the Hive Tyrant should have fired at the nearest target, since characters have to do this with heavy weapons. And 2, he couldn't have moved and fired the barbed strangler. Hand-to-hand combat ensued, and the warriors one and all brought a swift end to their victims as multiple bone sword hits were landed, making a mockery of their power armor. And that required a break test for the sergeant, but he held his nerve, easily getting under his leadership of 8 and not having to rely on Calgar for encouragement. 6 was the value of Warp Flux for this psychic phase, 3 cards each. The librarian again recovered from the effects of Psychic Scream, but the Hive Tyrant wasn't finished. He used Ultimate Force to cast it once more, but this time in a manner that could not be nullified. It was like he was showing the librarian the most disgusting alien arsehole he had ever seen. However, the roll was under the librarian's toughness, so he was unaffected, his mind now numb to the horrors of space and time. The librarian, inflated with confidence, cast Prescience, but this was easily nullified by the tyrant, who was clearly toying with this lesser creature. So I took my ball home and played Energy Drain, even though there was no real reason to do that. And that was how it looked after turn 2. The Ultramarines had lost almost 2 full squads, with most of the Tyranid swarm bearing down on the others. It didn't look good for Calgar and his men. At the beginning of my turn 3, Calgar charged the closest unengaged warrior. With no other movement, the Devastators let rip once more into the warriors, again putting their faith in their Hellfire rounds. One of them struck the nearest warrior and caused a single wound, while the other missed entirely. The remaining Marines open up with their bolt guns and bring down the wounded warrior. The brood was down to one last warrior. In hand-to-hand combat, Calgar swings with the gauntlets of Ultramar right and left. The result is close, but the Lord Macragge managed to inflict 1 wound on the warrior. The second warrior fared better, easily overpowering the sergeant and inflicting 3 wounds, his bone sword tearing through ceramite with ease. A mighty warp flux of 10 energizes the battlefield. Both our psychers cast their respective powers, though again Psychic Scream has no effect on the librarian, his steely mind immune to even the most graphic of alien body parts. In Ed's third turn, his lone Tyranid warrior joins the fight with Calgar, while the terrifying Lictor emerges from the shadows and charges the Devastator squad. In the face of such a creature, they have to make a leadership check, since the Lictor causes fear, but they pass. The Hive Tyrant continues its steady move towards its rival commander, standing atop the green knoll, looking out and laughing maniacally as its servants ravage the Space Marines. Terror checks were made, and all of them passed. The Sons of Gulliman have nerves of steel, it seems. At this stage, I'll point out that the Hive Tyrant somehow had taken a wound from something. It could have been the librarian's bolt gun, but I can't remember. My apologies, I should have written it down. Anyway, with no shooting to be done, it was straight on to hand-to-hand combat. The Lictor quickly brought its scythe-like claws down onto its victims, the first one being brushed aside with ease, but the second had more of a chance. In multiple opponent combats, subsequent fighters get +1 d6 to roll and +1 to their combat score. This wasn't enough to help the second Devastator Marine, who was brushed aside as easily as his brother, and so the victorious Lictor followed up into those that remained. Over to Marneus Calgar, who had 2 warriors bearing down on him. Marneus' first strike was brutal, but the warrior parried his deadliest punch with his bone swords. Yet, Calgar still managed to overcome his opponent, wounding him once, which was enough to drop the foul alien wretch. The Ultramarines commander then turned his attention to the second warrior, which received no bonus for being the second combatant due to the gauntlets of Ultramar forbidding such an advantage. The melee was fierce, and a parry by the warrior unfortunately turned a 5 into a 6, giving Lord Macragge the upper hand. He struck the beast, he pounded him thrice, wounding him twice, and ripping the abomination asunder. The Lexicanum now prepared to face the blows of his opponent. His single attack fumbled, though prescience allowed him to re-roll it. Yet, it was not enough. 3 palpable hits were landed on the Psyker, whose frame buckled under the strain, his armor failing him, yet he had one last gambit. The strategy card Last Gasp allowed one last death rattle, a free shooting attack just before the model dies. In his last moments, Theophanus pulled the pin on a crack grenade and planted it against his foe. It was a hit, it was a wound, and the save was failed, inflicting 3 wounds on the Tyranid and sending them both to oblivion. At the end of Ed's third turn, 7 models remain in play, save the 5 termagants, which Ed decided to leave across the table. With nothing standing in his way, Marneus Calgar steeled himself and charged the creature he came here to destroy. And of course, he passes the terror check, while the last unengaged Devastator opened up a big can of Flip It and charged the Lictor. In hand-to-hand combat, the 2 heavy bolter-carrying Marines are quickly dealt with, encumbered as they are with their heavy weapons, but being third gives the last Marine 2d6 extra to roll and +2 to his combat score. The brave fighter indeed won the combat, but couldn't wound the foul beast. That aside, the duel of the army commanders began. The Lash Whip allows the Tyrants to make 3 attacks before hand-to-hand combat is resolved. The target of these attacks must roll under his initiative to avoid strength 4 hits. Calgar managed this for all 3, and the combat began proper. The combat score is 16-14 to the Tyrant, giving him 2 hits, both of which wounded. Calgar needed to save on 6 or more, which was unlikely, but he had a conversion field to help.
So I first need to save up on 6 up. I've got conversion field as well. Oh, look at that!
Outrageous.
Remarkably, his ancient armour held fast, and he survived the first round of combat with the Tyrant.
Can we get the word Chad into Marneus Calgar's name? Marneus Calgar.
I think here we didn't count the Tyrant as encumbered for holding a heavy weapon. I'll have to remember that one in the future. On Ed's final turn, the last warrior entered the fray with Calgar. The last Space Marine, now alone with the Lictor, did not survive for long, and joined his brothers in glorious, or perhaps foolish death.
There's only one Space Marine left on the table, and it's Marneus Calgar.
Bloody Calgar.
The first round of combat is fought between Calgar and the Tyranid warrior. Both fumble, but the warrior fumbled harder, and his parry was not enough to stop the Ultramarines' furious blows. 2 of these wound, and beneath them, the chitinous armour fractured and the warrior fell. Again, the great commanders clash fist and bone, sword. There were a few fumbles, but more of them belonged to Calgar, whose mistakes allowed 4 hits through, 2 of which wounded. This time, Calgar's armour failed to protect him, but his conversion field gave him some protection at least. 1 wound was sustained at the hands of the Tyrant, and with that, the last turn of the game was over. What an absolute bloodbath. 17 models I took, only 1 remained, and in a precarious position. Of Ed's army, what remained was a Hive Tyrant, a Lictor, and 5 Termagants. So let's total up the score. My mission was to assassinate, giving me bonus points for each character killed, which in this case was nil points. Each Tyranid warrior destroyed was worth 2 points, so that was 4. And for wounding the Hive Tyrant, I gained a single point, which is not usual for characters, but there is an addendum for scoring in the Tyranid Codex which says that this is the case. So that means 5 points to the Ultramarines. Ed's mission was terrorize. Since I failed 0 leadership checks this game, he only scored a bonus point for killing my Lexicanum, which, along with the normal scoring rules, is 2 in total. The other points scored were 2 each for the Assault Squad, Devastator Squad, and Tactical Squad. 6 from all of these, and 8 in total. So the final score, 8 to the Tyranids, and 5 to the Ultramarines. This was a foolish mission, based on a man's hubris, which is probably not at all in character with Marneus Calgar, but I thought it would be entertaining to have him try to hunt a Hive Tyrant. A brave manoeuvre, or a fool's errand? Probably the latter. Tactics-wise, although it was good fun burning 8 termagants, Ed himself said that this was the most effective use of a flamer he had ever seen. I think the positioning of my assault squad was awful. It would have been better to slam everything into the warriors and Tyrant. The Lictor was scary though, deadly in combat and hard to hit with shooting. A sneaky devil to be sure. The other tactical consideration were those Hellfire shells. I think against a Carnifex they would be a good idea, but I think regular rounds would do better against warriors. I guess I got too excited adding them to my roster, and was chomping at the bit to use them. Calgar did some work though. He clobbered those warriors good, but I think in a prolonged combat with the Tyrant, he was unlikely to win, since his gauntlets of Ultramar are only damage 1. So, are small games beautiful? I think they are. I had to think about my army list differently compared with the large force, and like Adrian said, every dice roll was significant. When my heavy bolters missed, I was, well, devastated. Big weapons like the Barbed Strangler could be more swingy, and the game wasn't without its moments. When the Lictor unexpectedly caught my assault squad, that was tense. When my Librarian went out with a bang, taking down a Tyranid with a crack grenade, it was glorious. Small battles, big stories. I guess I am sold. But I still love having tank battles as well. Anyway, the same weekend we played this game, Ed and I played another game, 2,000 points of Orcs versus Ultramarines and Legion of the Damned. But I shall leave that to Ed since he is more experienced with battle reports than I. If that video is not up on his channel yet, it will be soon, and I will put a link in the description as soon as I am able. I have been Matthew. This has been Miniscape. Take care, and thanks for watching. There we go, lovely. Tidied them up a bit.